Greetings, Midcoast Ukes. Jeff Weinberger coming at you here with a new tutorial. I'd like to talk about a song called It's Only a Paper Moon and get more specifically into something called diminished chords, which is a big part of this song. There's a whole bunch of lessons to be had from the song, though. Let's get right into the diminished chord aspect of it first. So it has a chord in it that, when you look at the name, it looks a little intimidating. C-sharp diminished. That might sound, just by its very name, like a sort of hard chord to play, but let's check it out. It's actually kind of easy. All you do is you put your first finger on the C string first fret, put your second finger on the A string first fret, leave your G and E strings open, and voila! There it is, C-sharp diminished. Not too hard, but it just sounds like it would be fancier than that. So that's the easiest form of the diminished chord, the one that only takes two fingers. If you're at all familiar with the chord A7, this C-sharp diminishes an awful lot like A7, just with one extra finger added. And then if you're familiar with D7, it's an awful lot like D7, just kind of moved over a set of strings and back a fret. But there's a lot of similarities between C-sharp diminished and other chords that might be more familiar to you. Alright, so there's that easy diminished form that only requires two fingers. And then there's the movable one, the one that we can take up the neck to play any diminished chord. That involves four fingers. Let's try one out. Let's put our pointer finger on the first fret of our G string. It's the first step. Let's put our second finger, our middle finger, on the first fret of the E string. And then if you're with me so far, we have two more to go. You put your ring finger on the second fret of the C string, and finally your pinky on the second fret of the A string. So you basically have all four fingers on board, and two of them are on the first fret and two of them are on the second fret. So it's this really distinct shape. No other chord on the ukulele has quite that shape. So that, if you played it at the first fret, as we're doing right now, that can be one of four different chords. And I'll explain the theory about diminished chords maybe later, but you'll just have to take my word for it that this has four different names. This can be a G-sharp diminished, it can be a D diminished, it can be an F diminished, or it can be an A diminished. Any one of these four notes within the chord can be considered its root. Why that is, well, that's a long-winded discussion we'd have to get into that I'll spare you from today. But yeah, every diminished chord you know is actually four different diminished chords in one. That's kind of cool. That might be confusing theory-wise, but it's actually very useful too. So the C-sharp diminished that we did, that only needs two fingers. And the C-sharp, for those of you keeping score at home that are into music theory, the C-sharp note, the root, is right there. It's on the C string, first fret. Our pointer finger is the one that's playing the C-sharp, but it has other names if you want it to. Alright, so you got that easy diminished shape, and then you have the slightly harder four-finger shape. Now check out how this is movable. You can take that same chord that we're playing at the first and second frets and sneak it up to the second and third frets. Sneak it up to the third and fourth frets, etc. So it's totally movable. That's the very essence of a movable chord. It's one that you can play the exact same shape at different frets to get different chords. Now there's this other thing about diminished chords that's really interesting, and that's that they repeat themselves every three frets. And so if you play the diminished chord we just discussed at the first fret, first and second frets, and say we called it by this root, G-sharp diminished, well, move that up three frets. And this also is a G-sharp diminished. The G-sharp note is actually on the E string now. Move it up three more frets. It's still a G-sharp diminished chord. The G note is now on the C string, 8th fret. And move it up three more frets and voila, you get another G-sharp diminished chord. In this case, the G-sharp is on the A string, 11th fret. So all four of those were G-sharp diminished chords. You hear that lick a lot. That's kind of common in ragtime music and music from the time of Scott Joplin, and back then the 1910s, the 1920s, etc. A lot of diminished chords in music went up like that. Just kind of has that old Roaring Twenties kind of sound to it. So that's kind of cool how you can play that same chord at 4 different frets, or even more if you can reach that high on your ukulele. So diminished chords are pretty interesting. They have a lot of kind of unique things about them. That sound is a very suspenseful kind of sound, isn't it? Which you heard a lot in early silent films, Buster Keaton movies and things like that, with the lady being tied to the railroad tracks and the villain with the handlebar mustache and all of that stuff. It's a very common sound. We associate it with suspense. So that is one of the features of It's Only a Paper Moon that's useful to us, is that it uses a diminished chord, and a pretty friendly diminished chord, that C sharp diminished. Not bad at all. That is a chord any one of us can do. All right, so we have that. And then another thing about Paper Moon is that it kind of swings. It has a kind of a jazzy beat to it. And when you're playing it, there's a number of ways to make it swing. I did a variety of things in that intro. I guess I started by finger picking it. I was going like, but when you're strumming it, to make it swing, you want to give it a 4 on the floor feel. You want it to have 4 even quarter notes per measure, and really emphasize the downbeats. Each chord getting 2 beats. We're going to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And that's the 4 on the floor kind of feel. I was counting 1, 2, 1, 2. That's how many times per chord. But really, in official, beat keeping duties, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's what I call 4 on the floor, when you have those 4 even beats like that. Quarter notes, basically. Another way to play this is to try to shorten those up a little bit. Try to make your C chord muted. Try to put your fingers on top of the strings, or your right hand on top of the strings, so that it makes the chord shorter. Another aspect of that is the press-release technique, where you're pressing down on the fretted notes of a chord, but then shortly thereafter you release, and that makes that note die out, and then the other notes you can make die out by covering them. So you get more of a swing sound when you make your chord short like that. Gerald Ross talks about that all the time. It's like on a G7 chord, you're fingering 3 notes. You have 3 fingers on the ukulele, and those are easy to lift and make the chord stop ringing. So what do you do with your G string? Well, you just take it out of play somehow, by any means necessary. In this case, I might even use my left-hand thumb to do that. I reach over and stop it with my thumb. So whether a chord has all 4 fingers down, like those diminished chords we talked about earlier, or a single finger down, like a C7 chord, you can make it short. You can make it stop ringing. It's a lot easier on fully fretted chords. And that's some argument for learning chords up the neck, learning your D minor chord, for instance, instead of way back here, learning your D minor chord up here, because that's all fretted, and it's very easy to make that short. Whereas the open version, you have that open A string to deal with, a little bit more challenging. But it can be done. So muting techniques, that's kind of by pressing and releasing, or using other fingers to stop strings. That's how we get that swing feel. Last aspect of the song I wanted to talk about before we wrap it up is the fact that because it's 2 beats per chord, that's excellent chord changing practice. That makes for a really good exercise. So if we take the first 4 chords of the verse, C, C sharp diminished, D minor, and G7, and we strum them 2 times a piece, that forces you to get your fingers good at going from a C to a C sharp diminished, to a D minor, to a G7, and then you do it again, and you do it again, and before you know it, you own that chord change. That's under your fingers, and you've got it. And you can play more medium tempo swing tunes like this. But at first, of course, practice that slowly. Just take your time. C sharp diminished, D minor, G7. And after a while, it's possible to go faster because your fingers have really learned their job. They know where to go, and you don't have to worry about keeping up with your strumming. Maybe your strumming is fast enough, but your left hand isn't changing chords fast enough. That's a very common thing. And so we can work on that. We can get our left hand to keep up by just drilling those, doing them as an exercise. 2 of these, 2 of these, 2 of these, and 2 of these. Do it at a leisurely pace. Just do it relaxed and easy and slow. And then before you know it, you speed up a little. Maybe a couple weeks later, you're here. 6 months down the line, you're like doing like a pro. So that's a really good vehicle, this song, It's Only a Paper Moon, to learn about a bunch of things. Diminished chords, strumming, getting a swing sound, and chord changes. So I hope you enjoyed that, Midcoast Ukes. I hope you learned a lot. Maybe we'll bring back It's Only a Paper Moon into our jams at some point. If some of you are kicking and screaming for it, I'll gladly do it. I like the song personally myself. All right, Midcoast Ukes, you take care. Bye-bye.